The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Rosalind Newman stumbled off the stagecoach in Cottonwood Springs, Arizona Territory. 1878, her tattered reputation trailing behind her like the dust kicked up by the horse's hooves. At 32 years old, she carried nothing but a small carpetbag, the weight of scandal and divorce papers that felt heavier than all her worldly possessions combined. Rosalind brushed the travel dust from her simple navy dress, adjusting her bonnet to shield her eyes from the curious stares of the townsfolk who had gathered to greet the stage. Word traveled fast in these parts, and she knew her arrival had been anticipated with hungry curiosity. The divorce had made her somewhat of a spectacle, even here, hundreds of miles from Philadelphia, where she had left behind a life of comfort and a husband whose cruelty was known only behind closed doors. "That's her," whispered a woman loudly enough for Rosalind to hear. "The divorcee from back east. Can you imagine? Leaving her husband like that? Shameful." Rosalind kept her eyes fixed ahead, clutching her bag tighter as she made her way toward the small boarding house where she had arranged lodging. Her aunt's letter had promised Cottonwood Springs would offer a fresh start away from Philadelphia's suffocating judgment. But the whispers following her suggested otherwise. "Mrs. Newman," called a cheerful voice, cutting through the murmurs. A plump woman with kind eyes waved from the porch of a whitewashed two-story house. "I'm Mrs. Hollister. We've been expecting you." Rosalind managed a small smile, grateful for the warm reception from at least one person in this dusty town. She hurried toward the boarding house, aware of the continued stares drilling into her back. "Don't mind them," Mrs. Hollister whispered as she ushered Rosalind inside. "Folks here ain't used to newcomers with stories more interesting than their own." "Thank you," Rosalind replied, her voice barely audible. "I appreciate your kindness. Your Aunt Judith wrote that you'd be needing work as well as lodging. I took the liberty of mentioning you to Doc Fraser. He's been looking for someone to help in his office organizing, correspondence, that sort of thing. If you're interested." Rosalind nodded gratefully. "That would be perfect. I worked as my father's secretary before I was married." "Excellent, you can start tomorrow." "For now, let me show you to your room." The small room was sparsely furnished but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Rosalind set her bag down and sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back to flow freely. She had traveled for days, leaving behind everything familiar to escape the whispers, the pointed fingers, the scarlet letter of divorce that society had branded upon her. She had hoped that here, in this frontier town, people would be too busy with their own survival to care about her past. But it seemed judgment followed a woman everywhere, even to the edge of civilization. Morning arrived with harsh sunlight streaming through the thin curtains. Rosalind dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, a simple gray cotton with white collar and cuffs, and pinned her auburn hair in a tight bun at the nape of her neck. She would make a good impression on Dr. Fraser if it killed her. The doctor's office was a small building near the center of town. Rosalind took a deep breath before pushing open the door, stepping into a tidy waiting area with several chairs and a desk. "Hello," she called softly. A door at the back opened and an elderly man with spectacles and a kind face appeared. "Ah, you must be Mrs. Newman. Mrs. Hollister mentioned you'd be coming by. I'm Dr. Fraser. Pleased to meet you, sir. I understand you're in need of assistance with your office matters." "Indeed I am. My eyes aren't what they used to be and my handwriting has become atrocious. Do you have experience with record keeping?" "Yes, sir. I maintained all my father's business correspondence and accounts for several years." "Excellent. Let me show you what needs doing." The morning passed quickly as Dr. Fraser explained his filing system, showed her the appointment book, and outlined her responsibilities. By noon, Rosalind felt cautiously optimistic about her new position. The work was straightforward, the doctor was kind, and best of all, he hadn't asked a single question about her past. As she stepped outside for a brief lunch break, intending to return to the boarding house, she nearly collided with a tall man carrying a stack of lumber over one shoulder. "Pardon me, madam," he said, stepping back quickly. His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked him as not originally from these parts. Rosalind looked up quite a ways up into the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen. The man was dressed in practical work clothes. A battered cowboy hat pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair streaked with silver at the temples despite him appearing to be not much older than her. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the short beard that covered his chin. "No harm done," she replied, finding her voice. "I wasn't looking where I was going." "Xavier Blackburn," he said with a nod. "Just Zav to most folks around here. Rosalind Newman, I'm working for Dr. Fraser now, new in town then, welcome to Cottonwood Springs, such as it is." He gestured with his free hand at the dusty street and modest buildings. "Thank you, it's different from what I'm accustomed to. Philadelphia, right?" At her startled look, he gave a rueful smile. "Small town, news travels." Rosalind's heart sank, so he knew, of course he knew. "Yes, Philadelphia. Well, Mrs. Newman, I hope you'll find what you're looking for out here." There was no judgment in his eyes, just a quiet understanding that made her curious. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat. "Better get this lumber to the schoolhouse. Roof's been leaking something fierce." She watched him walk away, his stride long and confident. There had been no whispered comments, no sidelong glances of disapproval, just a simple welcome. The next few days settled into a routine. Rosalind worked at the doctor's office from morning until late afternoon, took her meals at the boarding house, and kept mostly to herself. She was aware of the whispers that followed her divorcee, abandoned her husband, probably unfaithful, but she held her head high and focused on her work. On Sunday, she reluctantly prepared for church. Mrs. Hollister had kindly but firmly insisted that attending services was essential for anyone hoping to integrate into the community. Rosalind knew it would be an ordeal, facing the entire town in such a public setting, but she recognized the wisdom in the older woman's advice. The small white church was packed when they arrived, and Rosalind felt dozens of eyes turn toward her as Mrs. Hollister led her to a pew near the back. The hymns were familiar, at least, a small comfort in this strange new life. After the service, Mrs. Hollister insisted on introducing her to what felt like every resident of Cottonwood Springs. Most were politely reserved, offering cool welcomes that didn't quite reach their eyes. A few were openly friendly, including the schoolteacher, Miss Porter, who warmly invited Rosalind to visit the school sometime. As the congregation dispersed into the churchyard, Rosalind found herself cornered by three well-dressed women who had been eyeing her throughout the service. "Mrs. Newman," said the eldest, a severe-looking woman in an expensive dress. "I'm Mrs. Whittaker. We're pleased you could join us today, though I must say we were surprised. In Philadelphia, I understand the churches are quite strict about allowing women of your situation to attend services." Rosalind felt her cheeks burn. "I've always found comfort in worship, Mrs. Whittaker. Indeed, how interesting. I wonder what Reverend Simmons would say if he knew the full circumstances of your situation." Mrs. Whittaker's smile was brittle. "My sister lives in Philadelphia, you see. She writes often." "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," Rosalind said, though her heart raced. "Don't you? A respectable woman doesn't abandon her marriage vows. Mr. Newman must be devastated by your betrayal." "You don't know anything about my marriage," Rosalind whispered, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I know enough," Mrs. Whittaker sniffed. "Cottonwood Springs is a God-fearing community, Mrs. Newman. We value traditional morals and family loyalty." "Perhaps you should focus on your own morals, Mrs. Whittaker, and leave Mrs. Newman's business to her." The deep voice came from behind Rosalind. She turned to find Xavier Blackburn standing there, hat in hand, his expression calm but his eyes hard as flint. Mrs. Whittaker drew herself up. "Mr. Blackburn, this is a private conversation, in the middle of the churchyard. Doesn't seem very private to me." He stepped closer to Rosalind. "Mrs. Newman, I believe Mrs. Hollister is looking for you." Grateful for the rescue, Rosalind nodded. "Excuse me, ladies," she murmured, hurrying away from the group. She expected Xavier to follow, but when she glanced back, he was still standing with the women, speaking too quietly for her to hear. Mrs. Hollister was indeed waiting for her, concern etched on her kind face. "Are you all right, dear? I saw Agnes Whittaker had cornered you." "I'm fine," Mr. Blackburn intervened. "Did he now?" Mrs. Hollister's eyebrows rose. "Well, that's interesting. Xavier doesn't usually involve himself in town matters, keeps to himself, that one. He was very kind. Do you know him well?" "Not well, no. He came to Cottonwood Springs about 5 years ago, bought that struggling ranch outside town. Works harder than any man I've ever seen. Turned the place around through sheer force of will, I reckon. He's fair in his dealings, helps where he can, but doesn't socialize much." She patted Rosalind's arm. "Come along now. Sunday dinner won't wait." Throughout the meal with the other boarders, Rosalind found her thoughts returning to Xavier Blackburn. There was something in his eyes when he'd interrupted Mrs. Whittaker, not just kindness, but understanding. As if he knew what it meant to be judged unfairly. Monday morning brought rain, a rare blessing in the dry territory. Rosalind hurried to the doctor's office, holding her shawl over her head as protection from the downpour. The waiting room was already filled with patients. The changing weather often brought aches and pains to the elderly and those with old injuries. "Morning, Mrs. Newman," greeted Dr. Fraser. "We've got a full house today. Would you mind helping with some basic care while I see the more serious cases?" "Of course," she replied, though she wondered what basic care entailed. "Nothing complicated, just bandage changing, checking temperatures, that sort of thing. My nurse usually helps, but she's down with a fever herself today." Rosalind spent the morning moving among the patients, following Dr. Fraser's instructions and finding an unexpected satisfaction in the work. By midday, the rush had eased, leaving only a few patients waiting their turn. The door opened, bringing a gust of rain-scented air and Xavier Blackburn, supporting a young man who appeared to be one of his ranch hands. The boy's arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, blood seeping through. "Doc," Xavier called, "got a situation here. Hank caught his arm on a nail while we were patching the barn roof." Dr. Fraser emerged from the back room. "Bring him in, Xav. Mrs. Newman, would you assist, please?" Rosalind followed them into the examination room where the young cowboy was settled onto the table, his face pale beneath his tan. "It's just a scratch, boss," he protested weakly. "No need for all this fuss." "That scratch needs stitching," Dr. Fraser said after examining the wound. "And a thorough cleaning. Mrs. Newman, would you prepare the instruments, please? And we'll need hot water." As she assisted the doctor, Rosalind was aware of Xavier watching her, his expression unreadable. She focused on her tasks, handing instruments to Dr. Fraser, helping to clean the wound and holding the young man's shoulder steady as the doctor stitched the jagged tear. "You've done this before," Xavier observed quietly while Dr. Fraser was focused on his work. Rosalind glanced up. "I volunteered at a hospital in Philadelphia during the war." There was much work to be done and too few hands to do it. He nodded, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "Handy skills to have out here." When the procedure was finished and the patient bandaged, Xavier insisted on paying despite Dr. Fraser's protests that it could wait until the end of the month. "You'll take it now, Doc," he said firmly, placing coins on the desk. "And a little extra for Mrs. Newman's help." "That's not necessary," Rosalind protested. "Maybe not, but it's deserved." He helped his ranch hand to his feet. "Come on, Hank. Let's get you back to the bunkhouse before this rain gets worse." They had just reached the door when it burst open, revealing Mrs. Whittaker, dripping wet and red-faced with anger. "There you are," she exclaimed, pointing at Rosalind. "I've just received another letter from my sister. How dare you show your face in our town after what you've done?" Rosalind froze, her heart pounding. "Mrs. Whittaker, I don't know what, don't play innocent with me." My sister writes that your husband is a respected businessman who gave you everything, and you repaid him by running off like a common. That's enough." Xavier's voice cut through the tirade like a knife. "This is a doctor's office, madam, not a street corner for spreading gossip." "This isn't gossip, Mr. Blackburn. It's the truth. She abandoned her husband without cause, breaking her sacred vows without cause." Xavier's voice was dangerously quiet. "And you know this how, exactly? My sister wasn't in their home, wasn't in their marriage." He stepped between Mrs. Whittaker and Rosalind. "Mrs. Newman doesn't owe you or anyone else an explanation for her pain." The room fell silent. Rosalind stared at Xavier's back, his words echoing in her ears. No one had ever defended her before, had ever suggested that her reasons for leaving might be valid, might be private, might be born of suffering. Mrs. Whittaker sputtered. "Well, perhaps you should start," Xavier suggested mildly. "Might give you some perspective." He turned to Rosalind. "Mrs. Newman, would you allow me to escort you back to your boarding house? This rain's getting worse." Unable to speak past the lump in her throat, Rosalind nodded. Dr. Fraser, who had watched the exchange in stunned silence, finally found his voice. "Mrs. Newman, take the rest of the day." "I can manage here." Outside, the rain had eased to a gentle drizzle. Xavier held his coat over Rosalind's head as they walked, his ranch hand trailing a few steps behind. "You didn't have to do that," she finally said. "Maybe not, but someone needed to. She'll make things worse for me now." Maybe she'll think twice before spreading tales she knows nothing about. He glanced down at her. "People like Agnes Whittaker thrive on others' shame. They count on silence." They reached the boarding house steps and Rosalind turned to face him. "Thank you. Not just for the escort, but for what you said back there." "I meant it," he said simply. "Whatever brought you to Cottonwood Springs is your business. You don't owe anyone your story or your pain." The simple truth of his words unlocked something in Rosalind's chest. For years, she had carried the weight of her failed marriage like a shameful secret, had endured the whispers and judgment without defense because she believed, on some level, that she deserved them. "Would you like to come in? Mrs. Hollister always has coffee ready." He shook his head. "Another time, perhaps. I need to get Hank back and see to the animals." He touched the brim of his hat. "Good day, Mrs. Newman." Rosalind watched him go, feeling something shift inside her, a small spark of hope that perhaps in this dusty frontier town she might eventually find peace. The following weeks brought a gradual change to Rosalind's life in Cottonwood Springs. Mrs. Whittaker and her circle continued their cold treatment, but others in town seemed to take their cue from Dr. Fraser and Mrs. Hollister, who treated Rosalind with warmth and respect. She grew more comfortable with her role at the doctor's office, even assisting with minor procedures when the regular nurse was busy. Xavier Blackburn became an occasional visitor to town, stopping by the doctor's office on business or nodding to her in passing on the street. Each time he treated her with the same quiet respect, never pressing for details about her past but offering small kindnesses that meant more than grand gestures. One evening in late October, as Rosalind was closing up the office, Xavier appeared at the door. "Mrs. Newman," he greeted her. "I was hoping to catch you before you left, Mr. Blackburn. Is something wrong? Is Hank's arm healing fine? Thank you. No, I'm here on a different matter." He seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "There's a harvest dance at the Peterson farm this Saturday. I wondered if you might consider attending. With me." Rosalind stared at him, caught entirely off guard. "A dance?" "Yes, madam, nothing formal, just folks gathering to celebrate the season. There'll be food, music, it's a tradition hereabouts." I don't know if that would be appropriate," she said carefully. "Given my situation." "Your situation being that you're a single woman who might enjoy an evening of music and company." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Unless you'd rather not be seen with a rough rancher like me." "I'd understand that." "No, that's not it at all," she took a breath. "It's just, people talk, people always talk. Question is, do we let them decide how we live our lives?" He studied her face. "You don't have to answer now, think about it," she nodded. I will, thank you for asking. That night, lying in her narrow bed at the boarding house, Rosalind turned the invitation over in her mind. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself any form of pleasure or social enjoyment. Her marriage to Harold Newman had been joyless for years before she finally found the courage to leave joyless and painful in ways she could never explain to someone like Mrs. Whittaker. The memory of bruises hidden beneath high-necked dresses, of explanations for broken fingers that no one questioned, of nights spent in terror, these were the true stories of her marriage. Stories she'd never told, not even to her family, who had been shocked and horrified by her decision to divorce. Only her Aunt Judith had offered support, sending her the money for the train ticket west and the name of Mrs. Hollister's boarding house. "A fresh start," she had written, "where no one knows your past." But her past had followed her, or at least the rumors of it had. Yet here was this man, this quiet, strong cowboy, offering friendship without demands, respect without conditions. Saturday arrived clear and crisp with the scent of autumn sharp in the air. Rosalind had sent word to Xavier through one of his ranch hands that she would accept his invitation, and he had replied that he would call for her at 4 o'clock, Mrs. Hollister helped her prepare, lending her a shawl of soft blue wool that complemented Rosalind's best dress, a simple affair of dove gray that she had carefully altered to follow the current fashion as best she could. "You look lovely, dear," Mrs. Hollister assured her as they waited in the parlor. "That color brings out your eyes. Do you think people will talk?" Rosalind couldn't help asking. "Of course they will, that's what people do." The older woman patted her hand, "But not everyone's talking badly. Many folks in town are glad to see Xavier taking an interest in something besides that ranch of his. He's a good man who's had his share of troubles." "What sort of troubles?" Rosalind asked, curious about the man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. Mrs. Hollister hesitated. "That's his story to tell if he chooses. Just know that he understands more than most what it means to start over." Before Rosalind could press for details, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Hollister hurried to answer it, and Xavier stepped into the parlor, looking almost unfamiliar in clean trousers, a pressed shirt, and a dark vest. His hair was neatly combed, the silver at his temples catching the late afternoon light. "Mrs. Newman," he said, his voice warm, "you look beautiful." Rosalind felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, you look very handsome yourself," he offered his arm. "Shall we? I've got the wagon outside." The Peterson farm was about 2 miles outside town, a prosperous spread with a large barn that had been cleared for dancing. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a golden glow over the proceedings. A small group of musicians played lively tunes while couples whirled across the floor. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and children darted between the adults, playing their own games. As Xavier helped Rosalind down from the wagon, she felt a moment of panic at the thought of facing the entire community in such a social setting. But his steady presence beside her gave her courage. "Mr. Blackburn." "Didn't think we'd see you this year," called a jovial farmer, approaching with a cup of cider in hand. "And Mrs. Newman, welcome, glad you could join us." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," Rosalind replied, relieved at the friendly greeting. "Help yourselves to food and drink," he said. "And don't let this one step on your toes too much when you dance." He winked at Xavier, who actually looked embarrassed. "I'll do my best," Xavier promised. They made their way through the crowd, stopping to speak with various townsfolk. Rosalind was surprised at how many greeted her warmly, inquiring about her work with Dr. Fraser or commenting on the mild weather. There were some cool looks from Mrs. Whittaker's circle, but even they seemed subdued in the festive atmosphere. After filling plates with roast chicken, cornbread, and fresh vegetables, they found seats at a table with several of Xavier's ranch hands and their partners. The conversation flowed easily, with talk of the harvest, plans for the winter, and good-natured teasing about who would win the pie-eating contest later. As twilight deepened outside, the music shifted to a waltz. Xavier turned to Rosalind. Would you care to dance? I should warn you that Mr. Peterson wasn't entirely joking about my abilities, she smiled. I'd like that, and don't worry, I haven't danced in years myself. He led her to the floor, placing one hand lightly at her waist and taking her hand with the other. Just follow my lead, such as it is. They moved somewhat awkwardly at first, finding their rhythm, but soon were gliding across the floor with reasonable grace. Rosalind couldn't remember the last time she had felt so light, so free from the burden of her past. In Xavier's arms, with the music swirling around them, she was simply a woman enjoying a dance with a handsome man. You're smiling, he observed. It suits you. I'm having a wonderful time, she admitted. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for coming, I wasn't sure you would. They danced another round before stepping outside for some fresh air. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds. Xavier led her to a bench beneath a large oak tree, far enough from the barn to offer privacy but close enough that the music still reached them. It's beautiful here, Rosalind said, gazing up at the stars. So different from Philadelphia. Do you miss it? The city, she considered the question. I miss certain things, the libraries, the concerts, but not the life I had there, he nodded, understanding in his eyes. After a moment of comfortable silence, he said, I was married once too. Rosalind turned to look at him, surprised by the confession. You were in Texas before I came here. Her name was Sarah. His voice was soft with memory. She died in childbirth, her and our son both. Oh, Xavier, I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago now, 8 years. He looked out into the darkness. Afterward, I couldn't stay there. Too many memories, too many well-meaning folks telling me it was God's will, that I needed to be strong, that I should find another wife soon. His mouth twisted. As if she could be replaced, as if my grief was an inconvenience to them. So you came here. Eventually, wandered for a while first, worked cattle drives, took whatever jobs came my way, then I found Cottonwood Springs, liked the look of it. Bought that run-down ranch and poured all my energy into making it work. And have you found peace here? He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. I'm starting to think I might. The simple statement, laden with meaning, made Rosalind's heart beat faster. She had not considered the possibility of finding not just peace but happiness in this new life. Had not dared to hope that she might find someone who could understand her past without judgment, who might see in her not a scandalous divorcee but a woman with courage. That day in the doctor's office, she said slowly, when you told Mrs. Whittaker that I don't owe anyone my pain. It was the first time anyone had ever suggested that my reasons for leaving might be valid, that I might have suffered in ways they couldn't see. Did you suffer? He asked quietly. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Harold was not the man people thought him to be. In public, he was charming, respected. In private, she took a shaky breath. In private, he had a temper, and I was the only available target for it. Xavier's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers wrapping gently around hers. I figured it might be something like that, the way you flinch sometimes when someone moves too quickly, the look in your eyes when people mention your marriage. I never told anyone, not even my family. They wouldn't have believed me. Harold was so careful to never leave marks where people could see. You're very brave, Rosalind, he said, using her given name for the first time. To leave, to start over, to face all this judgment rather than stay in that situation. His words broke something open inside her, a dam she had built around her emotions, her fears, her hopes. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she made no effort to hide them. I don't feel brave, she whispered. Most days I feel like I'm still running, still afraid. He squeezed her hand gently. Courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing what needs doing despite the fear. They sat in silence for a while, the music from the barn providing a distant soundtrack to their thoughts. Finally, Xavier spoke again. I won't rush you, Rosalind. I know you've been hurt, that trust doesn't come easy after what you've been through. But I want you to know that I care for you. And whenever, if ever you're ready for more than friendship, I'll be here. She looked up at him, this quiet, strong man who had defended her without knowing her story, who had seen her pain without demanding its details, who offered patience when others had offered only judgment. "I think," she said carefully, "that I might be ready to consider the possibility." Slowly. His smile was like the sunrise. "Slowly sounds perfect to me." Winter descended on Cottonwood Springs with a ferocity that surprised Rosalind, used as she was to the milder Philadelphia climate. Snow piled in drifts along the streets, and the doctor's office was busy with cases of frostbite and winter coughs. Through it all, her friendship with Xavier deepened, evolving gradually into something more. He would ride into town whenever weather permitted, sometimes bringing fresh meat or vegetables from his greenhouse, a luxury few in the territory could boast. They would take meals together at the boarding house or at the small cafe near the general store. Occasionally, when the roads were passable, he would take her for drives in his sleigh, wrapped in warm blankets with heated bricks at their feet. Their courtship was conducted largely in public, which proved an effective answer to the gossips. Even Mrs. Whittaker found it difficult to maintain her campaign against Rosalind in the face of Xavier's obvious respect and the community's growing acceptance. At Christmas, Xavier presented her with a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts," he explained, "your stories. Whatever you want to write. It's lovely," she said, running her fingers over the smooth cover. "Thank you." "I have something else for you too," he said, looking uncharacteristically nervous. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "This was my mother's, I've been saving it. Hoping someday I'd find someone I wanted to give it to." Rosalind's breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a small, perfect pearl. "Xavier, I'm not asking for an answer today," he said quickly, "just for you to consider it. To know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I would be honored to make a life with you." She looked at the ring, then at his face, reading the hope and love in his eyes. 4 months ago, she had arrived in Cottonwood Springs carrying nothing but shame and fear. Now, against all odds, she had found someone who saw her strength instead of her scandal, who offered love without demands. "Yes," she said simply, his eyebrows rose. "Yes, you'll consider it? Yes, I'll marry you." She smiled at his stunned expression. "I've had enough of waiting for happiness, Xavier. I've found it here with you." They were married in the spring, when the desert bloomed with unexpected color. The ceremony was small but well attended, with even Mrs. Whittaker offering grudging congratulations. Dr. Fraser gave the bride away, and Mrs. Hollister wept happy tears as they exchanged vows. Rosalind moved to Xavier's ranch, which no longer seemed isolated but rather a peaceful haven. Together, they built a life based on mutual respect and understanding, on shared dreams and honest communication. She continued to work with Dr. Fraser several days a week, finding fulfillment in helping others and putting her organizational skills to good use. In time, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Sarah Judith, honoring both Xavier's first wife and Rosalind's supportive aunt. The little girl grew strong in the clean desert air, surrounded by love and protected from the kind of pain her parents had known. Years later, when Sarah was 10, she came home from school in tears, having heard whispers about her mother's divorce. Rosalind sat her down and told her the truth in terms appropriate to her age about the choices she had made and why. "Remember this, Sarah," she said, echoing words that had changed her own life. "You never owe anyone your pain. Your story is yours to tell or keep as you choose." From the doorway, Xavier watched them, love and pride evident in his face. Their eyes met over their daughter's head, a lifetime of understanding passing between them. In a world that had tried to shame them for their pasts, they had found redemption in each other, creating a future built not on judgment but on compassion, not on convention but on love. And in the wild frontier of Arizona territory, where so many came to reinvent themselves, Rosalind and Xavier Blackburn had found not just a new beginning, but a lasting happiness that neither had dared to hope for in their darkest days.